Good morning, friends and visitors of St. Martin Lutheran Church. Wonderful to see you this morning. Today is Thursday, April 16th, and the thought for today is mental preparation. Mental preparation. I'll explain what I mean a little bit with that. But just so you know, on normal days, I'm going to try and do these streams at 11 a.m. each day. At 11 a.m. each day. That way people know about what time to expect them and they can watch them later. I'd like to do them regularly earlier, but I'm in the nursing facility in the mornings often, and 11 o'clock seems like a good time. Now, with saying that, I'm doing it early today at 10 a.m., and that is because the memorial service for Jim Grant is later today, and I'm in the process of preparing for the service itself with a handful of Jim's family members present, and keep an eye out for when we're able to gather again. We'll have a much larger gathering here at the church at St. Martin in the future, hopefully not too long. Well, I saw it was a tweet by someone yesterday, and it kind of made me chuckle. The tweet basically said, well, everyone today is either a constitutional scholar and or a disease control expert. And I just laughed because I see what she was getting at the tweet is that, and I find myself doing this too. We all have opinions not only on disease control, but constant things that are going on. We had a rather large gathering in Lansing yesterday. People upset with the lockdown and its effects on the economy, and that might be simplifying it too much, but I think that's a big part of it. And on the other side of that spectrum, you have people who support the lockdown and in fact believe that it should be in place for even longer, some suggesting even a year or longer than that. Now, where my mind is going right now is that wherever you fall on this spectrum, whether you believe the lockdown should be ended today, or whether you believe the lockdown should be even more stringent and continue indefinitely or for some longer period of time, I think the need for all of us right now is to mentally prepare ourselves for all contingencies. And part of mental preparation is thinking through in your mind different scenarios, not unlike the athlete who is visualizing making that putt or making a free throw, or in your own work, giving a presentation, you're visualizing what you're going to do in these different circumstances. And of course, the benefit of mentally preparing yourself is that you're ready, for whatever life brings you, and especially during this time when we're in a pandemic condition. Now, I personally, myself, I would be in favor of lifting restrictions earlier. And when I say that, I don't mean, now, but if we're going to say, 2 more months to a year, I would lean on the lesser of those two. I think it's good we're locking down now. I think it's the right thing to do. And I want to make sure I'm not playing armchair quarterback like all of us are. We don't have to make the decision. We can just complain about the people who do. So always keep the governor of our state in your prayers, as well as other federal and state leaders who have to make these decisions. They certainly can't be easy. And I don't know about you, but I'm glad I'm not in that position. But for me, if the choice was between a year of restrictions and a couple months, I would of course support the latter, the lesser of the two, simply because then we can utilize our resources, financial and other resources, to protect the vulnerable for longer, the ones that really need to be protected. Because, and again, I'm not an economist here, but there's going to come a time when our governments are going to run out of resources. They're going to run out of money. You can only print up so much money before you run out, or however else the governments are doing this. I'd much rather see those who are most vulnerable be able to be quarantined for as long as they need be. Because if no one's working, no one's getting tax revenue. You know how it goes. Remember that comment I said earlier about how everyone thinks they're a medical specialists or a constitutional law. We can throw economist in there as well. We're all becoming economists and constitutional law scholars. But my thought is that no matter what happens, and we don't know, is that there's benefit in mentally preparing ourselves for what might occur. And which brought me to, it's actually our gospel for this week from the Gospel of John. And this is about a group of people who were not mentally prepared for what happened. And I read from the Gospel of John, the 20th chapter, John chapter 20, beginning at verse 19. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came, stood among them, and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Thankfully, the author of the Gospel of John, which happens to be John, writes the purpose of the book itself so that people would believe, and that by believing we would have life in the name Christ. Well, as you read from this, Thomas certainly was not mentally prepared for the resurrection, and neither were the rest of the disciples. If you find even the witness of the women who had been at the tomb and said, "We've seen him," they didn't believe them. Their brains were not mentally capable of contemplating what had happened until they themselves experienced the risen Christ for themselves. But Jesus had told them over and over again that he was going to be raised from the dead. And either they didn't listen or they weren't preparing themselves. Now, I don't believe I would have behaved any differently than the disciples did. But there's something about mental preparation. And as I was contemplating our own lockdown and all of the contingencies that could possibly happen in our community, in our state and federal government, I thought about when Beth and I had our first child, a little over 16 years ago. And I remember walking out of the hospital that first morning, putting tiny little Ruthie in a car seat, taking a while fumbling with all the harnesses and straps because we had just learned how to do this. And I kept wondering, when is somebody going to jump out of the hospital and say, "Stop, you can't take this child, you don't know what you're doing"? The time is going to come, brothers and sisters. I don't know when we will have to venture out into the world again. I don't know when. Nobody does. But I know that there is benefit in mentally preparing ourselves ahead of time. The disciples themselves had not prepared themselves for the resurrection. It came as quite a shock. And that during this time, I also encourage us to continue to pray for our leaders. We hold our leaders accountable, of course, but pray for them as well every day, that they have the wisdom of God, that they're making the right decisions for the right reasons, that we're looking not just at the short term, but the long term ramifications of all of these things. So many different variables involved. And at a lesser extent, we're doing the same thing here at St. Martin. We're planning on all the variables. In having private communion with someone yesterday, we got into a discussion for this one individual. This had been the first time they had been out of their house for almost a month, and we were talking about how it's gonna be really weird, is it not, when we are permitted to gather again as a worshiping body. That what are you going to do? Are you going to shake someone's hand? Are you going to give them a hug? I'll tell you, when I first started here at St. Martin about 10 years ago, one of the first things that was said to me after I accepted the call was that, Pastor Jim, do you like hugging? Now, I should have known what was behind that question. So, of course, without thinking, I answered, well, no, not really. And the person who asked me the question said, well, tough, because we believe in hugging. What are we going to do? I don't know. But I know mentally preparing ourselves for what may happen beneficial, as well as continually praying for our leaders in government at the local and state and federal level as well, that they do what's wise, keeping those who are most vulnerable in mind when they make their decisions, and especially prayers to our medical personnel who are on the front lines of this. And I will tell you, and I know this is anecdotal, but I've already run into a number of medical personnel who have already contracted the virus, gone home, recovered, and are now back to work. We're in that phase now, so we're figuring out how all that works. And we're asking questions like, well, if you had it and recover, can you get it again? Again, I lean on my non-medical professional credentials. So thank you for this time. Today, I'll tell you, my wrist is hurting from playing guitar, playing the acoustic guitar a little too much, and I have a pounding headache right now. So I know it does. I'm smiling as I say that. I'm smiling because, again, those of you who know me know I get headaches all the time, so it's no big deal, right? So our song's going to be very brief this morning. We're just going to sing what's known as, it's called the doxology. The doxology, which is a fancy Latin term for giving praise to God in an oral or written form. And it takes the form of praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with favor and give you peace. Pray for our leaders. Pray for Jim Grant's family. Receive the Lord's blessing and be a blessing to others. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.